You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nutrition Matters podcast. My name is Paige, and I'm your host. And today I am sharing a conversation I had with Amy Severson, who is a dietitian with really important ideas around fear of food and really important lived experience around that as well. And that's what we talk about in today's podcast episode. We talk about her own history of kind of feeling fear around food and why that came to be for her, and some concrete steps that she took and ideas that we have as dietitians to try to work through that fear of food. And I'm really excited to finally have a podcast episode about this, because I think fear is at the core and at the root of so much of our struggles with food. And it's just such an important topic to really hit on directly. So I was so glad to do it with Amy. She's such a smart, wonderful, compassionate person and has so many great ideas about this topic and other ones as well. And she's actually also, we talk about this in the podcast, but she's also in the process of writing a book, which is really super exciting. So keep your eyes out for that as well. So as always, if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that by clicking a link in the show notes. And for $5 a month, you can receive 3 extra podcast episodes. There's a guided meditation, there's a monthly nutrition lesson, and then a monthly Q&A episode. And so if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing here, you can do it that way. And you can also receive a couple extra resources as well. So consider that if you've gotten something out of the podcast and would like to help keep it going. That would be fabulous. And if you can't afford that, or if that doesn't make sense for you right now, it's always really helpful to leave a review, to share with your family or family and friends, and to just keep tuning in. So thanks for your support. Thanks for being here. And I hope you enjoy this podcast episode with Amy. Hi, Amy, and welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, Paige. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited.
Me too. And we're recording this many weeks into the pandemic, where we were trying to record this a long time ago, kind of during the beginning, and it was just a little too much for both of us at the time. But here we are. We're ready. Our brains are kind of back in it, right?
We are as back in it, I think, as we're going to get for a while.
at least good enough.
Good enough.
Yeah. Okay. So Amy, introduce yourself and talk about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. I'm Amy Severson. I'm a registered dietitian in Washington State. I live in Bellingham, Washington. So I'm just a little north of Seattle, where there's a lovely pocket of, Seattle and Portland area has a lovely pocket of some really great health at every size, intuitive eating folks. So I'm in a really cool area. I've been a dietitian since 2017. I've been in private practice the whole time, which is wild, but here I am. And I write some articles occasionally. It's been a while since I've done that, but pandemic, that's what happens. And I'm also in the process of writing a book with Sumner Brooks about intuitive eating for kids. And we're very excited about that.
Oh, I'm excited too. I cannot wait to get my hands on that. And Sumner has been on the podcast as well, and she's fabulous too. So that's going to be awesome. Are you kind of taking it chapter by chapter? Are you both writing all of it together, or how's it working as a team?
Doing a lot of trial and error right now for how
Okay.
we like our whole system.
Yeah.
It's so far we've tried, we each write a chapter and then we swap them. We've tried, one of us writes all the chapters and the other one does all the edits and like puts and fleshes out. And I don't know, we'll figure it out as we go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so awesome. But to have both perspectives and kind of have each other to sort of be like, oh, this could be better this way. Like it's nice to do it as a team, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's kept us from getting stuck in our own brains.
Yeah. Oh, I bet that's a real pitfall of writing a book. I could see that.
Definitely.
Oh, like where you just stare at the same word way too long and you're like, is this even how you spell it? Like, I
Yeah.
just feel like that would happen on a much broader level.
Exactly. We've definitely had times where we don't talk for like a week and then all of a sudden we'll talk and be like, I don't think this makes any sense. And one of us is like, I think you mean this. And oh my gosh, yeah, that's the exact point I was trying to make.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Perfect.
That sounds so great. So, talk about kind of your process of getting into the health at every size space. Talk about kind of your career and your journey.
Yeah. I started my career path to become a dietitian by like I started college with the anticipation of becoming a dietitian. I started college a little bit later. I was a non-traditional student, whatever that means. I was like 22, um, which actually worked out because I knew what I wanted to do and I finished it, so that was good. And I didn't have to live in the dorms. That was also really nice. And I went to school specifically for this. I went to Montana State University and I went in with this like, it was this weird, like conflicting desire. Part of it was I really wanted to like be a better dietitian than the ones I'd encountered in my life. The one I wanted to be someone who recognized like the nuance and the individuality that people needed and wasn't being prescriptive and was being really like kind and caring. Like I think deep down, some part of me knew that I wanted to do some sort of intuitive eating thing, although I had no words for that and no language. And another really big part of me wanted to figure out how to do my own eating disorder better and really wanted to like go into it with this, I'm going to be the after picture in my story and I'll be that kind of dietitian. And yeah, I went all through school with like this conflicting piece of like, I need to do this better, air quotes, for me, but I need to be not like this for for my clients and for future clients. And it was kind of an interesting experience in that way, but I stayed like that for quite a while. And then after college, but before I became a dietitian, I had took a couple of years off between my internship and school. For multiple reasons. One, I wanted some time off too. It's really hard to get into an internship. I started getting treatment for my eating disorder.
Okay.
And I started seeing a health at every size based therapist. And she introduced this to me and really made it, I don't know, it took me I was a little bit resistant for a while and really probably argued more than I needed to about some things. But I came around to it. And then I actually had these moments of like, oh my gosh, can I be a dietitian from this framework? Like, does these work together? And like throughout my internship and prior to my internship was a lot of like trying to figure out how I could be a dietitian with health at every size and with this new perspective I had on food. And I figured it out. And yeah, now it's integral to my practice. I don't think I could see myself doing any other framework ever.
Yeah, the answer is totally. You can totally be a dietitian from that perspective, but I could see why you asked the question because it's like, wait, this feels so opposite from what I learned in school, right?
Yeah, it's so completely counter to almost everything we learned. And it's like, if I'm not controlling someone's food, what's the point of being a dietitian? Obviously,
Yeah.
there's a point, but it was really kind of pushing against something in my education, I think. And then I kind of came around, which I'm really glad I came around.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good point because I think a lot of people who are thinking about seeing a dietitian might also have that same question. Like, wait, what's the point in even talking about nutrition with someone if I'm now like embracing this more health at every size perspective about my body and about health? Like, what's the point of talking to a dietitian? It's funny. It's like the process the clinician goes through is often very similar and kind of mirrors what the potential like client might go through too, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's like this, yeah, it's this mirror experience, different in different ways, but it's, yeah, we go through the same almost like grieving process of the
Mm-hmm.
things that we knew.
And it helps you in the end be a better clinician if you like stick with that. And if you look at that as like an opportunity to really kind of learn what you need to learn to do your job better, like and just break through that kind of black and white, oh, if it looks this way always, and kind of be like, well, wait a minute, like how can I take the parts of my training that are really health promoting and positive and helpful and leave the parts that just kind of we know through experience and through research that are just not beneficial for people, right? Like there's a way to do that. It just takes some real wrestling, I think.
It does. And I think the more like saying, the more we can learn how to sit with our own process in that,
Hmm.
the more experience, the better equipped we are to sit with our clients in their process with it. And it's like you said, having that experience is really valuable.
Yeah. So talk about I mean, I don't know how much you want to talk about this. I, I didn't really ask you this, but like your process of you were you were done with school, you hadn't completed your training to be a dietitian, you were seeking treatment for an eating disorder. Is that all accurate so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So like what were you struggling with? I know you and I had talked today about like talking about kind of what to do if you feel afraid of food. Would you say you had some fears about food going
Oh,
on?
oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience, and I never really considered that I had like on and off considered that maybe I had an eating disorder for years, but my eating disorder didn't look like um a traditional eating disorder. It didn't look, I wasn't in a really small body. I wasn't um doing any behaviors that would put me in under a bulimic spectrum, and it I didn't feel like a real eating disorder for a really long time. It just felt like I was a bad dieter, and like a really bad dieter basically my entire life. And I also have a couple like random health issues I've always had. I've had IBS since I was like 8, and therefore like some sensitivities, let's say, to certain foods. And I can eat them, but like they can screw with me sometimes if I eat them at the wrong times.
Okay.
And that created a lot of like, there was a time in my life where I didn't eat those for like 2 years because I was so afraid of the physical symptoms that would come with it. I was so afraid of being addicted to sugar after reading Michael Pollan's work. Um, I was so afraid of I was afraid of eating fast food. I was afraid of so many things. Basically anything that wasn't like a green salad, I was afraid of because it didn't fit the like okayness that I was supposed to be. Like if I ate anything else, then it would just confirm that I was a bad dieter.
Oh my gosh.
And
So that hits on a lot of really kind of important things to highlight as far as where food like fears can start or stem from, right? So
Mhm.
one of them is following the diet rules for sure. And unfortunately, if you spend enough time online, I don't recommend it, but if you spend enough time online, you could probably find a reason to feel fear about pretty much any food, even including things that you'd think are on most diets good list, quote unquote, right?
Absolutely.
But then
And
there's
yeah.
also this other side that you mentioned that I just want to highlight is the fear of like causing harm in your body or like symptoms or discomfort. And for many people, it's a kind of a combination of both. Some people might sort of kind of steer one way or another, but But it sounds like you kind of had a double whammy going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely, I see this now very frequently in my clients where there is often a fear of causing physical issues, whether it's, and we know how common it is to have like IBS is like, I think I saw a statistic recently. Sorry, statistic is a hard word for me to say.
It's a hard word for me to say too.
Statistic and rural, those are the two words I struggle with.
We all have those words where we're like, I can't say this.
I don't understand this word, but I saw a stat recently that it was like 98% of people with eating disorders have some form of IBS, and or vice versa. So 98% of IBS have eating disorders, one of those two. And I think it's really just important because IBS has so many different causes and things that can, trigger it. It could be a food, but it could also be stress and the fact that we're putting a bunch of stress in our body from not eating or stressing out about our food. And I see that so commonly in clients, and it's really important to know that it is pretty normal for that to happen, and it is okay to have both those fears, and you can also work through those things. Like I still have IBS because it doesn't go away, and I still eat all my quote unquote trigger foods. I just know how to manage them a little bit better. Partly because I know my body better. So I know, when it's a bad idea to eat a big heaping bowl of ice cream and when it's a really good idea. Yeah. And the bad idea is usually because like, oh, I already feel sick.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good point too. Like, as far as kind of working through fear, one of the big things that you're talking about is learning more about your body and learning to listen to it, learning to trust it. Talk about that though, because that for so many is like so much easier said than done to, especially if you feel like your body is actively betraying you, whether that's due to like internalized fat phobia or if that's due to actually experiencing, things like IBS or symptoms in your body. It's just sometimes it's just so foreign and so scary to start to even think that getting through or working through these fears you have might actually require you to start to trust your body. What do you think about that?
I think absolutely it's very difficult. And it can be really scary, like you said, like especially if you feel like your body is betraying you. And this is something I see a lot, whether it's in my own experience or with my clients' experience when they have chronic illnesses, or even like an acute illness that pops up, or like right now where we're stuck in a pandemic and it feels hard to trust your body. It makes it really hard to sit with it and listen into it. And I also think that there is real intuitive eating, real body trust comes from a sense of like flow. Like we might spend sometimes some parts of our life where we're very confident in our body's signals and we really know what it's saying and we trust that and we feel good about it. And other times it's like, okay, I'm hearing something, but I'm not quite sure what this is. And like right now, frankly, I think most of us are kind of in this space of like, this is weird. Intuitive eating is harder for a lot of people right now. And I think that that's really valid and really important to note that it can be really difficult and it can be really scary to trust something that feels like it's been betraying you, or it's been a place where you're not allowed to trust or not supposed to trust, or trusting it has like quote unquote led to this body. And it's a journey to feel like you can trust it. And the trust doesn't have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be this one look, this one type of relationship. It is kind of a dynamic, changing relationship. And it's like learning a new language. When we learn a new language, we're learning our body's language, and it's a journey. And occasionally our body will pop up a new word and we're like, I don't know what word that is. Like, never heard that language before. And that can happen 1 month in, it could happen 6 years in. And we might still be like, I have no idea what these signals are or what to do about them, but that's okay.
Yeah, I love that because it's not like trust is like a thing you do one day, right? It's like it's ongoing and it's changing. And I think the metaphor of parenting makes a lot of sense to me with this. Just as a parent, I remember, especially when my kids were just newborns, the minute I thought, okay, I'm starting to understand what this cry means and what they might need when they're fussing like that. But then once you start to kind of feel like you've got it, then things change again, right? And I remember
Uh-huh.
feeling so frustrated, like, when am I ever gonna feel like I know what they need or I know what they want or whatever. But I think it's such a interesting metaphor with our bodies. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, yeah, we might feel like we sort of start to understand what this feeling is in our body, but then we start to realize, well, maybe it feels different in the morning than in the evening, or maybe it feels different in summer than it does in winter, or maybe it feels different when I'm really stressed versus when I have a lower, like, workload or something like that. So it's, yeah, that expectation of this is ongoing and evolving and not like a destination, but just something that you continually kind of stay curious about. I think is a way better and more healthy perspective than sometimes the way it seems online is like, oh, you just take a leap of faith and then you're good. And I don't know, nobody really means that, but that's sometimes how people who are new to this stuff can kind of internalize some of those messages. It can kind of feel like, oh my gosh, what are other people figuring out that I'm not, you know?
Absolutely. I think that falls in the same like newcomer like perception sometimes, and also this like the way it's introduced to a lot of folks as like body positivity is, where you know I've had a lot of clients be like, but I can't love my body, and I don't know think I'm ever going
Yes.
to get to that point.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we have to like do some work to realize that it's not about getting to the point where you wear t-shirts that say I love myself all the time. Um, it's about getting to a place where you just don't actively hate yourself sometimes. And there's a difference. And sometimes that like overly it's overly simplistic and it's overly like perfect. It's perfectionist. It's the
Yeah.
perfectionist version of intuitive eating, and body positivity is a way to kind of come in, but it can also be really overwhelming because that's one heck of a lofty goal.
Yes. Okay, so how does that relate to fearing food or feeling afraid of food? I'm sure there's some parallels there where it's like sometimes the messaging can kind of feel like you just get to the point where you're afraid of nothing and you never have any like scared thoughts, or you just have a complete absence of fear, and I feel like a lot of people kind of wait for that moment where it just becomes super easy around food. Talk about the nuance of that.
I think I mean I definitely I recognize that thought, because I think that is definitely something we strive for, or we think we're supposed to arrive at as that destination of intuitive eating, or whatever we want to call it. And it's definitely one of those things that I feel like we probably get once in a while. Like maybe as we go through this like lifelong process, we get to a point where we feel that more often than not. Um, and there will still absolutely be times where we are afraid of our food, or we get this like twinge. I always like liken it to this like it's like a dog that you've trained to stay up in like the fifth floor of your house, um, and doesn't bark at the doorbell anymore, but occasionally it gets surprised and barks, but you know how to shut it down real fast. So occasionally we hear that like distant bark of a dog, 5 stories up. And that can be still come up as a twinge of like fear or twinge of a diet thought. And those I think can stick around for a really long time. And it's it's all back to a journey. It's just a journey. And I think one of the ways we can start to let go of that fear of food and move through that fear of food is one, recognizing that fear can mean different things. Like there is that really palpable fear of the physical harm or pain it could cause you from whether it's a chronic illness or an allergy. Like if you're allergic to something, probably not eat it. Um, And then there's the fear of all the all the ridiculous health consequences we see about food or eating these things, and they're conflicting and they're inaccurate and they're forever changing. I read an article recently where there's a dietitian in it or a nutrition researcher in it, making a argument that every time we as a nutrition field make a recommendation, we should have to put a disclaimer that says we don't actually know that much about nutrition. This will probably change because it's so real. And when we put out these, or when this data gets disseminated or we put it out there, it is just so much space for food to cause fear. Like there, and if you don't see the conflicting information that exists, or you don't know how to dig into the research, which frankly, most of us don't know how to dig into the research or don't want to because research is really boring. And if you don't know how to do those things, or you don't want to, or aren't able to, then you're never going to see the super deep nuance of why these recommendations were made, or if they were made on any like strong evidence at all. And that's a problem because that is where these like magazine headlines, the Facebook ads, there's like weird ads that pop up in the middle of news articles and stuff. It's like, these are the 5 foods you could never eat again. And if you don't know, you don't know where that information comes from. And of course, those are going to cause fear. And I think right now we're also very much in a place where a lot of us are really afraid of our bodies and what our bodies can do or will handle this, because whether it's if we have chronic health conditions that might put us at a higher risk for COVID, or we have the really great body shaming comments that are coming out right now. So even being afraid that your body size right now could be, your actual body, your entire body could be putting you at a higher risk for this super serious disease that we don't know that much about. It's very real. And if the main way you get this information, which is unfortunately the main way the vast majority of us get our information, is from social media and the internet, you're lost. Like, it's so easy to go down those rabbit holes and to see the arguments that make quote unquote sense and be afraid. And it's a challenge.
Yeah,
Sure.
I have so many thoughts, and maybe just I'll start with this one. I think it's important to ask yourself if you're getting your information about nutrition via social media or the internet, and you're noticing that you feel fear. I think it's important to kind of ask yourself why. Like, why would what would be the motivation for this person who's putting out this message to create fear in me? And if we can recognize that fear is an incredibly powerful motivator, like from an evolutionary perspective, like we are supposed to be motivated by fear. It's very adaptive and helpful for us psychologically, right? So if someone is creating fear in us, we have to recognize, oh, like it's a powerful motivator. What are they trying to motivate me to do? And I think a lot of times identifying, oh, well, then I'm more likely to spend money on this thing that they're talking about, or I'm more likely to buy their product, or I'm more likely to yeah, honestly, spend money. Usually, if you follow the fear, there's some dollar signs there. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's such a rabbit hole to go down to follow the money. And it almost makes me feel like a conspiracy theorist because it's
Yeah, I
so
know, right?
intense. Every time I start telling somebody about it, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to ask you to put your tin hat on, but I feel like maybe I should,
That's
because
so funny.
it's so deep. It goes so deep.
But like, okay, yes, we could kind of think about it like a conspiracy theory, but I think another way to think about it is we are all like in this system, right? Like even the
Hmm.
people who are perpetrating the fear and the money, like, I mean, I think in a lot of cases, probably not every case, but in a lot of cases, they believe what they're saying and they're just as much sort of a victim of the system as any one of us. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but sometimes I think that way.
I completely agree. Because it's how we're taught. It comes back to like if we as dietitians reflect on our own education, that's kind of what we're taught too. And or very much what we're taught too is probably a better way to phrase that. And like we know that that's what doctors are taught. You know, they're still taught the BMI system and how to diagnose people based on their BMI. And we know that weight bias is taught in medical schools. And like there's a lot of places that are trying to undo that, but it's still definitely being, whether it's implicitly or explicitly taught in medical schools, it's still being taught. And again, I don't think that comes from a place of someone trying to like maniacally, evilly cackle in the corner while they like rake in their dollars. It's what they know. It's what we
Yeah.
all know. And so it's what we just keep spreading.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that you feel the same. I was wondering how you'd feel about that. Yeah. Okay, so Amy, you were talking about kind of the different types of fear, and then we went down a little rabbit hole there. Was there anything else you wanted to mention as far as that main idea of identifying kind of maybe different types or where that fear is coming from?
I think probably one, I think it's really important to validate how normal it is to have a lot of fear around food. Having fear around food is not, it's not pathological. It's not um, wrong. It's normal. It comes back to this whole, it's what we're taught thing. And it's also a really deep hole sometimes to dig yourself out of. And it is also 100% possible to pull yourself out of it, you know, especially the physical stuff that we have that comes from a place of body trust and comes from a place of learning your body's signals too is really important. That's learning that language that your body is speaking. And I think when it comes to the other types of fears, like fears that it's going to make your body larger, or fears that are founded from these weird magazine articles that tell you that XYZ is going to kill you in 2 years. I have no idea if that's a real article, but probably. Um, those, I think, take a lot of unlearning. I feel like that's what I do as a dietitian a lot, is helping people unlearn a lot of that nutrition information. And a lot of kind of creating a bubble for yourself to make a safe place where you're not getting this wildly inaccurate nutrition information or nutrition information that's completely irrelevant to you, because a lot of it's really irrelevant to most of us, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so fear is a very strong motivator. It's important to kind of understand that many of where the fear might be coming up for us is coming from a place of people trying to sell you something. Um, and recognizing like fear about sort of the minutia of nutrition, kind of what you just barely said, Amy. It sounds like your point is like that may or may not really matter overall and on a practical level for you, right? And so some of that fear might be coming from sort of a misplacement of energy in maybe forgetting about the fundamentals or the foundation and trying to kind of get really nitty gritty, about this, that, or the other tiny little element of your eating that if you zoom out, it's like not really all that important or not going to make or break your health or energy levels or well-being or whatever. Is that a good summary?
Yes, that is very succinct.
Okay, good. No, that's good. Yeah. So the other part where I think, I think we're kind of moving away from this, maybe culturally, or maybe I'm just in a bubble. I'm not sure. But, for a while it was just obsession with like, um, those orthorexic tendencies, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, I'm not dieting, but I just want to be like so obsessed with every single thing that I'm putting into my mouth. And um, like I won't eat this and I will eat that. And I'm worried that if I eat this, the wrong thing, it's going to like, my body's not going to like it and I'm not going to feel well. Like there's this pressure to eat perfectly and to pay so close attention to what it is that you're putting in your body that can, ultimately really create pretty paralyzing fear around food. Did you experience any of that?
Yes. I remember feeling, especially as like in school when we were learning about like all the micronutrients and all the macronutrients, I remember feeling like I had to track every single thing. Like I have to make sure I get enough vitamin D from my food. And I lived in Montana, like I needed vitamin D. Um, and like trying to get all the correct amounts of protein. And I was really into the protein piece and like trying to cut down on my carbs in order to get enough protein. And um yeah, it wasn't as intense as some people experience it. It was definitely more about very explicitly about the weight for me, but um, I definitely like did a lot of that, and it was intense. It's pretty intense, and I think that there is definitely a bubble that we all find ourselves in. People who do this work because we create it for ourselves for our own safety, and I do think that it's still very present, but it's shifting
Yeah,
again.
that's
Like
true.
it's shifting
It's like
away from like
morphing.
yeah, like it's less macro counting and more like I don't even know how to describe it now. Some places, certain unnamed diet apps are still calorie counting. Um, some are like be vaguely aware of your calories and then just stay in that range. I think the exercise to burn it all off thing is back. If it ever
Hmm.
went away, I don't know. Um, I don't know. There's like so many little nuanced hidden like pockets of this that it's you know it when you see it, but if you don't know it, like if you don't already recognize it for what it is, it's hard to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about fear in general, Amy. I think that, well, fear with food in general. I think that when I feel fear around food, which honestly isn't very much these days, but I just kind of recognize it for what it is. I'm like, okay, there's some fear. Okay. Whether it's, I don't even want to give examples actually. But anyway, I kind of like to remind myself or kind of check in with, okay, what what is worth feeling fear over in this world? Like in my world, there are plenty of things to feel afraid of, and there are plenty of threats, right? Like, and I like the word threat because when we feel fear of food, it sort of implies that food is threatening. And when I put it that way, whether it's in my own self-talk or talking with a client or someone else, it's like, okay, tell me about like what is truly threatening in your world. I think a lot of times it's kind of easy to say, okay, yeah, there's racism, there's sexism, there's unequal opportunities, there's oppression, there's real safety and access issues. And by the way, some of that is related to size. And so when we're trying to sort of get very serious about, okay, where are the threats, it's really important to acknowledge that for some it really truly is threatening and feels very threatening, and in reality is threatening to be in a larger body moving through this world. And so I don't want it to come off like I'm saying, oh, food isn't really a threat for anyone, because I want to acknowledge that there is an element of this that is very real and we need to talk about that. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that too, Amy. But food itself, like of all the things to have threats or feel threatened by or threatened for in our world, I think it's useful to sort of contemplate the question, like, is food one of them? Like, is food truly threatening to me? Is that something that I if I kind of rank what's threatening in my world, is it up there for me? What's your reaction to that? I'm interested to hear.
I completely agree with that. And I think one of the things that I like to bring into this conversation, because I think it's really important, is how much we this is what our culture has done, particularly our American culture. This is probably true for others as well, but we're American, so I know this one a little bit better. And the fact that we stem from very puritanical roots, we've put a lot of things that equal pleasure into this hard threat. No, we should only do this for XYZ reasons. And, food is absolutely in the pleasure camp. I mean, that's why graham crackers were invented and cornflakes was to help us, quote, help us stop feeling pleasure, force us to stop feeling pleasure, which is sad.
So
Um,
crazy. Yes. So sad.
so weird. So we have like this really long history of putting these pleasurable things into the threat camp. And if we really look at it, it's not though. Like it's just not threatening. The things that cause us pleasure or give us pleasure, it's probably a better way to phrase that. Give us pleasure for a reason. It's an evolutionary thing. And especially the like supernatural things that we're supposed to do in order to, like live on as a species, food being one of them. Of course we're going to feel pleasure from them because our like brains are programmed to be like, yeah, let's keep seeking this out because we want to stay alive.
Right.
And that's also that's a theory apparently for why body sizes have gotten bigger over the past however many years is because for once we're actually safe. So we're allowed to seek out pleasure, and it's not a problem. It's just that we are no longer constantly running from another threat too. One of our biggest threats now is like there's a reason why we have like a floor for how low our weight can go. A lot of us do. Why in our like set point ranges we can't go it's hard to go below a certain amount because that's a threat. It's a threat to go below that. But we're no longer feeling as much of a threat for going too high, quote, because we aren't also running from tigers on a daily basis. So
These are such good points. I think, are you referring to Alan Levinovitz work about like the puritanical roots and kind of the mistrust of anything that brings us pleasure, like sugar sort of being equated to like alcohol and sex and stuff like that? Is that,
that's
yeah,
definitely in there. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
fascinating. When I learned about that, that really clicked a lot of things into place too. It's like, oh, that makes sense that there's sort of this automatic cultural, like in our DNA almost, like mistrust of anything that's like pleasurable. It's like, if it feels good, there must be something like fishy about this, you know?
Yeah. It's like a bad thing to be. It's like, I don't know, it's the word like foodie, even like the hashtag foodie is like thrown around with almost like this sense of like clandestine nature. Like I'm a foodie, and like you can just like hear the like, ooh, it's almost shameful, it's naughty, and it's weird. Like, no, I just like food. It is cool.
Oh, Amy, how often do you have a client who you're kind of taking their history, you're asking like about, growing up, what was it like with food and how was your relationship with it and what was it like? And it's so common for me to kind of hear people sort of kind of in a shameful way sort of admit like, I'm just someone who's just always really liked food. And when I hear that, I always kind of make a note like, okay, we need to come back to that. And I need to make sure that they know like that's good. That's normal. That's great that you like food. That's so helpful in our work together. Like that's nothing to be ashamed of. Does that happen for you too?
Yes, it absolutely does. It's such a shameful phrase. Like it is always infused with so much shame, and it absolutely is in all those like diet articles and stuff. Like if you've always liked too much food, like shut up. Of course I like food. It's
Yeah,
delicious.
I know. I know. Okay, so let's talk about this as we're talking about kind of pleasure. Let's zoom in on this idea of food and taste and sort of feeling afraid of really enjoying the experience of eating. I would love to kind of explore that with you. What do you say when someone kind of lets you know that they're afraid of the enjoyment factor with food? I'd be interested to hear.
When someone brings up that particular concern, I really like to try and focus on that. It's the fear of the reaction, really. I really like to talk about that because I found it often comes from a place of like a word that I hear thrown around a lot with that phrase or with that sentiment is like I feel gluttonous or I feel um like extravagant, like it's too much. I
Like
like in
indulgent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's so just riddled with this like, but I'm not supposed to actually like these things. Like, I'm not supposed to enjoy these things as much as I do, and enjoying them means that I have to say no. It's like we've likened, liking a really good chocolate cake to liking heroin, Like if you like heroin, we might have a different conversation than if you like chocolate cake. And those should be two completely separate conversations.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's so hard to like, I don't know, for some reason we just equate them so hard. And it's like if you like sugar, it's an addiction now. And the truth is like we like sugar because sugar gives our brain energy and we need it. And we so often want sugar when we are deprived. And so those two things go hand in hand. We want it more and like it more when we are depriving ourselves. And so we feel more addicted and more afraid of it. And it is a very interesting space to be in. But I really like to dig into like what about enjoying food is bad? What about it is bringing up emotions? What emotional words are coming up? What fears are coming up? What words do you associate with this? And I've heard glutton more times than I think I've ever heard glutton before I started doing this work, honestly. Um,
Yeah, because the fear is like, okay, if I resist enjoying food and I find myself feeling so out of control with it, or I feel so chaotic around it, even when I'm trying to not enjoy it. And now you're saying it's okay to enjoy it. Oh my gosh, what will that look like? Like, I think that's what the fear is, right?
it absolutely is. Like if I'm allowed to enjoy it, then does that mean that I'm going to be, because we've basically put it on the same, whether we know it or not, plane as drugs. We are like, well, that means if I can have it, I'm just never going to stop, and it's going to
Right.
be chaos and out of control. And we also know that maybe it'll look like that for a little while, but not really, not forever. Partly because I really like a good chocolate cake, but um, not that much. Like I also like other food.
Well, and when you can have it, like,
Yeah,
and you know you can, and you really taste it, there's actually like, so there's flaws in the logic that says if I don't enjoy it, then I'll eat less of it or something like that. If that's the logic, like it's just not good solid logic. That's not what we see. What we see is you are way more likely to be aligned with like eating what feels good and what's pleasurable and satisfying and yummy to you. It's way easier to do that when you tune into the taste and the enjoyment than when you try to like shut that down. It like shutting it down, the logical next step is then you're not connected to what you're
mm-hmm.
experiencing, and then it's very easy to be sort of out of alignment with those cues. Does that make sense what I'm
Absolutely.
saying?
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, I think the other important thing too is the more this is just a really interesting like factoid, is the more we enjoy our food, the more like nutrients we absorb from it. And isn't that kind of the goal anyway? Like to get our vitamins and stuff out of our food. Um, we get more of that. We get more, and on top of that, we also get more satiated when we are eating our food with awareness and with enjoyment.
Yes.
And that's the truth. I mean, I think every single one of us has been hungry at some, whether it's diet based, disorder based, or like availability based, been hungry, only had this like, not very satisfying food to eat, eaten it, then been like, I'm full, like my stomach is done, but I need something else. Like that was not it. And that's the truth. That's what we all experience. And whether or not we feel that that is just our body um, asking for satisfaction, which is just a very normal human need, or it's our body not listening, our body not following suit with what we've been trying to whip it into shape with. That's a difference between dieting and intuitive eating.
So well said. Wow. I love this. Okay, so I want to kind of round out the part of the conversation we had about so fears coming from like what this food might do in your body, or how it might make you feel, or make you have a stomach ache, or you're not sure if you have some kind of like issue with certain foods, from a like IBS perspective or something like that. Is it okay if we kind of go there for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
When people, it's very common, I'd say maybe almost half of my caseload is this exact type of situation where it's like, I feel like this food makes me have stomach aches, so I've avoided it, but then I love it. So then when I'm around it, I can't stop. And then I'm mad at myself, and then I recommit. And then I'm making more and more rules about this because I think this bothers me and this bothers me. And it's very common for people to kind of go down this rabbit hole of trying to sort of alter what they're eating or cut certain things out of their eating in an effort to feel good, which, by the way, like makes sense. Oh my gosh, we want you to feel good too. Like it's not weird that someone might try to sort of go about it this way. But one of my first kind of interventions there, and I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about this too, Amy, is if I am also having the variable of fear in the equation of stomach aches and like food intolerances or IBS or things like that, if someone is feeling fear or anxiety about certain foods, I want to parse that out from the foods themselves, because I consider it very risky. I consider it a risky intervention to cut out entire foods or food groups from someone's eating pattern. I I think that to me is sort of like a last ditch effort. I want to make sure that the stomach aches or the symptoms they're experiencing aren't due to the fear itself, because fear is so powerful physiologically in our body. It can cause some of the same types of symptoms that someone might attribute to a certain food. So like, how do you parse that out? How do you think about that, especially as someone with lived experience with IBS? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
I absolutely agree with you that we have to parse those out, and that completely cutting out food groups should be a last ditch effort. It should be not our go to, which unfortunately is in a lot of situations. With a few exceptions, like if you are going to die from eating a peanut, please don't eat peanuts. Um, but I think it is so important to pull apart the emotional component of why we're afraid of this, or the physical reaction it's causing. Like I'm really gentle about bringing up the possibility that a reaction is psychosomatic. But it is extremely common. And I'm gentle about it because I feel like psychosomatic
Yes.
has like a connotation that it means that you're lying or that you're faking it.
Or that you're like totally just out there or something, right?
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
exactly. Like
you're
I'm about to
causing your
commit
own
you.
pain on purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, like you've entered like this weird Munchausen's by proxy situation. And no, that's not what it is. It's just so common. If we've thought for our entire lives that water will give us a headache, then water will probably give us a headache. It probably won't actually, but that thought process will come in for us.
Right.
And I think one of the first steps in working with a client who has a lot of food physical reaction fears to food. I'll say it that way, which is so common. And I'd say the vast majority of my clients have at least one of those. One of the most important things to start with is trust between myself and the client. And then starting to foster this trust in the process for them, like a trust that maybe these reactions are not true. Maybe food really is okay. Maybe beliefs have really played into to their physical reactions for them, or are making it worse. And that can be a long process. It's not always, but it can be. It depends on the stage of change the client is in. And then we kind of reach a place where we can talk about, like, let's use a gluten intolerance, for example. Someone who has thought for many years that they're intolerant to gluten, and it makes them feel really sick, really, like, gives them really bad stomach ache. We might talk about, like, why they're afraid of gluten, whether or not they like gluten, where this idea even came from, how it came around. And then, like, if one day, a few months in, I might be like, hey, what if you were to try a bagel today or tomorrow? How would you like that? And it's usually comes with a lot of fear and a lot of, like, oh, I don't know. And then they're usually willing to try it because we've really worked to establish some trust in that, like, hey, but if it causes you pain, that might happen still. Like, also acknowledging that psychosomatic reaction can exist for a while, even after we started to eat it again, or started to break down the mental process behind us, and that we can still have it and still get a reaction. And we can also look to see what else is going on in our lives, especially with things like IBS, which is so influenced by stress. That's when we can start to be like, okay, you had ice cream and it made you feel sick. What else was happening for you? Oh, it was finals week? Yeah, like, that makes a lot of sense. And
Right.
we can kind of start to notice the bigger picture, and also, like, the internal messaging that's happening. Because if you're eating the bagel and the whole time your brain is screaming at you, put the bagel down, this is going to kill you, of course it's going to cause a reaction.
Right. And I don't know about you, Amy, but for me, it's like I'm not anti finding out what might be a food trigger for you. Like that's good to know for sure. It's like for me, we want to look at the fear side of things and normalize the patterns around food and normalize, like, how often are you eating? Are you like restricting all day, or are you eating regular meals, and kind of looking at just overall patterns. And then if it's like, oh my gosh, that certain thing, it really does seem as if it's bothering you, then it's like, okay, we've got to work through what does that mean? What does that look like? How do we approach it? How do we think about it? Because it is a risky intervention to cut anything out. It's tough to do.
Absolutely. It's because it falls into that last ditch category. I want to exhaust every other effort
Yes,
first.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's hard to have a really normal relationship with food when there are certain foods that are off limits.
Right. Right. And it's wild. Some of my clients through the years who have had like anaphylactic response reactions to certain foods will tell me, like, I like crave it. I like want
Mhm.
strawberries, even though I know I cannot have them. I like want them. I see them and I want them. And that's probably not true in every case, but it's been fascinating to me to
Mhm.
just like witness the power of restriction, whether it's self-imposed or whether it's like for a medical reason. It appears that most often it sort of comes out the same way. It comes out as like you want it more when you can't have it, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And with a couple exceptions, one being allergies, the other one being celiac disease.
Right.
For the most part, for any nutrition moderated illness, something that we can quote unquote treat with nutrition, which evidence-based, I'm pretty sure, is really only celiac disease and allergies. We get to choose how we react, how we interact with that restriction. Like,
Yes.
we forever get to choose, because even with something like lactose intolerance, which is a pretty, straightforward thing, and we can medically test for it. It's real. Like, we know it's there. And there might be times where that gigantic bowl of ice cream is 100% worth it. And there might be times where you're like, no, thank you. I have to go sit in a crowded theater for the next 3 hours. Like,
Totally. Totally. And just like it might be totally worth it to be like, yeah, I'm eating this food that I know is going to make me really full, but I want it. Like I want to feel like this sounds awesome. I'm going to go past like comfortable fullness right now. Like it's within if it's within your rights to make decisions like that, like it's okay to not feel absolutely perfectly energized and wonderful after every meal. In fact, sometimes it's like I want to just get down on a feast, and that's totally fine too.
Absolutely. And it's just as fine to like finish a meal and not be completely satisfied, or like,
Yeah.
I'm finding this more often when I'm stuck at home with my, my kindergartner, where I'm like, there's nothing I want for lunch, but I'm hungry and I'm going to eat.
And you
And
don't have the freedom to go somewhere else, right?
I'm going to be mildly disappointed by this frozen pizza I just had. Like,
yes. Oh, that's been I just relate to that so much too. During this time, it's like there's just really not a lot of room for like, what's exactly sounding delicious? It's like, well, a lot more of it is, what do I have? And I just have to kind of deal with however that feels satisfaction wise to me, And of course, you could add little sauces or something fun to kind of like spice it up a bit, but there's only so much you can do sometimes.
Right, exactly. And this is, I think, this is a really good, palpable example of how, and even intuitive eating can shift. Like, I know for myself, 100%, I'm in a different intuitive eating place during lockdown than I was, I don't know, however long ago this started, 12 years, than I was 4 months ago. Like, my relationship with food was different 4 months ago because I had more freedom. And I also had more security and less anxiety and less, I don't know, fear about our government doing weird things. And that's fine. Like, it's fine that it shifts, and it's fine that it's different. And I'm sure it could be different next week. It all is going to depend on where my head is at and where my life is and what my ability to move around is. And that's okay.
That's such a great point. Yeah, this is a continually shifting thing, whether it's working on your fear with food, or working, like you said earlier, about like your sense of body image, or whether it's intuitive eating or all of that stuff. It's such a good reminder that it's not like a destination. Like we've said so many times today, it's like a continually evolving process. And as your environment shifts and as your situation shifts, so will your relationship with food and your body. And that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. That just means there's always more to learn, right?
Absolutely. It means you're surviving. And sometimes that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Oh, so good. Well, Amy, what else did you want to mention about fear with food that we haven't talked about? Or do you think we've covered it, or how do we do?
I think we got a pretty good smorgasbord here.
Good. Okay. We'll take a minute and talk about where people can find you and follow along with your work, and also when they can get their hands on your book.
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram, which I'm probably most active, although slightly less active during the pandemic, is Amy_RD. That's AMEE_RD. I'm on Twitter at Amy Severson. My website is prospernutritionandwellness.com. I have an online course in the works as well, with being created by me and someone else who also has ADHD. So we're slow going it, but it's fine. And Sumner and I's book is set for publication in winter of 2022. So hopefully it's January 2022 is our goal right now, and we are really looking forward to getting that one out.
Congratulations on all of that. That's fabulous. And I'll connect to your website so that people can find all those links in the show notes. Thanks so much for being here, Amy. This was a really fabulous conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.